Hello and welcome back to Web Design for Small Business. In this video, part 29, Order Page, we'll be creating the order page to go along with our menu page. So that way when people use the menu page to create an order, it has somewhere to go. So before we begin with that, taking a look at what we've done previously, I noticed one issue with our little alert messages. Well, actually, a couple things. First, I'm not exactly happy with the actual font. Well, the font face itself I'm fine with, but if you look at it compared to the rest of the text, especially on the main page, everything else is slightly bolder. So the alert text, which should kind of have emphasis, is really subdued. So I want to bring that back, basically increasing the size, giving it some boldness, basically giving that a header class. The other issue that I've noticed is the way that we have our close button. Currently with the close button, if the text extends, it'll actually bump that button down. For example, I've created a longer one for the menu page, and if you notice, it's not in the top right corner but the bottom right corner, and we don't want that. We want it in the top right because people are used to going to the top right to close things. The other thing I noticed is that if you do have more than one line of text, I feel like it needs some paragraph spacing there, which is simple enough to add. It's called a text indent. So we're going to quickly go and make those changes. So in our NetBeans, the first thing, because this is our menu, so I'll use that as an example, two quick things. So first, we want to change our admin message from a span to an H4. H4. So that will give it all the H4 properties, which will make it bolder. It should make the text darker and all that. However, I also want to move it. So highlight it, cut, and we're going to paste it after our closing button. So normally this would actually cause this to go in front of it, so it would move it to the left. However, because we have this set to float right, it will still go to the right, even though it's to the left of other fields. And also with this being in H4 now, it would normally be set for line breaks. But again, because we have this set to float, that will actually overwrite it, and we'll actually end up getting the placement that we want. So simply saving that and going back here and hitting refresh, you now see we get much bolder text, and our close button is where we want it to be. However, if you notice, there's some spacing here, just due to the layout of that, and on this side it's all straight, and this just looks a little too tight compared to how loose this side is. Now you could just try to justify the text, but that, well, it uses justification. So if you ever worked with any kind of Word document, you'll know that just spaces out the letters, and I'm not a fan of doing that. So all I want to do is simply add that text indent, and then if you notice when I zoom in, the text is green, and I want to make that our default gray text, which we don't actually use very much at all. But I figure the gray against the lighter background will make this alert message pop a lot more than having it the same color as all the other text. So we're going to add some CSS to fix that. So going back here, note this is an ID admin message, so we will use that for our CSS. So because it's an ID and not a class, it starts with pound admin hyphen MSG parenthesis. So first I'm going to do a text indent, and I'm going to set that to 1 EM, which is just in scale with the font size. Basically what 1 EM for text indent will do is give you basically 2 characters of spacing. So if there's 2 lines, the first letter of the top line will start basically at the 3rd letter, more or less. And then we're going to give it a color of pound 333, which is our gray color, and save that. So if we go back to it now, hit refresh, now we got that tab spacing, and note that the darker color pops out a lot more now, and this becomes a lot more prominent in the page, which is what we want. Alright, now the only thing is it doesn't translate over to all the other pages because we still have to apply that to each of our pages. So I will quickly go in and do that. And because we just had it on those 3 pages, that should do it now. And there we go. So even though this only takes up 1 line, you can see right away that it makes it just a lot more prominent, which is how we want it to be. So that is perfect. Okay, so for the next part, we want to go to our menu page, and what we want to work on is getting functionality into our little plus minus numbers here. If you don't see those, and you were following along very closely, you need to set the orders to green if you were doing the same type of thing, depending on what site you're making for yourself. But for us, we need that enabled so that we can see these and work on these. So basically what we need is that every time you hit this plus, this number increases, hit the minus, this number decreases, and then that will add to our order. Now if when you click on the order page, instead of going to the order page, if it gives you an error message, look up at the top in the URL. If you don't have English or whatever language you have in there, and it gives you instead the PHP echo lang, essentially what happened there is if you go to our index page and scroll down until you find the orders, and when we went and changed this to check to see if it allows the orders, which we disabled when we turn on and off that button. We had incorporated the order into our PHP code, but we may not have done the same to the language. It might have still been this PHP echo. So if it doesn't look like this, change it to that. So basically deleting the PHP and tags, the echo, and then replacing that with single quotes and double dots so that it looks like that. Alright, once that's done, go to our menu page, and we want to scroll down until we see this block of code here, which right in here from this span to this span is our order piece. So span class order, and then we have the minus button, the plus button, and our quantity in the middle. So two issues with this. The first is simply that this is part of our for each statement up here. So this is incremented and applied for each one. As such, we want to be able to identify each of these orders. So we're going to need to create an ID for the order. At the same time, this span or quantity has an ID tag, but that ID tag doesn't have anything that would make it unique. So this one would actually be copied across each one. And because you can only have a single ID for any field, having multiple fields with the same ID would actually break all of our JavaScripts. So we need to fix that. So that's the first thing we'll do. And all we're going to do for that is add a hyphen after that Q, single quotes, inside the single quotes, double dots, and inside there we're going to write $mi, square brackets, inside the square brackets, single quotes, inside the single quotes, ID. So what we're doing is we're just taking our item ID number and adding that to that, so that each one of these, as it prints for each item, will be unique. And then we're essentially going to do the same thing with this span. Just adding an ID is equal to double quotes. Inside that, we're going to put item hyphen, and then that same thing, which I'm just going to copy and paste from here. So ID is equal to item hyphen and our ID. Okay. So that's all we need to do in here for now. What we're going to do next is go into our CSS page, and we're going to add some CSS classes. So the first thing we need to do is, if we go back to our menu here and we look at these, there's nothing really indicating that these are buttons. I don't have my pointer cursor, and there's no change when I hover over. So we want to add both of those effects. Now, one of the nice things about our specific color theme for this website is that we use a dark red and a dark green. Now, these buttons are the success and error or danger colors, and it's really easy to apply our dark green and dark red as hover colors for that, because we already have the colors selected, and it will just give a nice kind of highlight to those. So that's what we're going to add for those. So going back to our CSS page first, and if you don't remember the names for them, just go back to our menu, and we have the class msub and madd for menu add and menu subtract. So that's what we're going to apply classes to. So dot madd with a capital A, comma, dot msub with capital S, curly bracers, and this is just going to be cursor pointer, semicolon. Underneath that, going to do dot madd colon hover, curly bracers, and give that a color, pound, and a green. Doing the same for msub, hover, color, pound, 700, and I'll just put a new line at the bottom of that and save that. Okay, so now we can go back to our menu page. And now we just need to add some JavaScript to make all of this actually function. So for our JavaScript, we're going to enter it right after this line of JavaScript. So after our PHP and before our page content. Always remembering to add our new line after our line of code. So the two of these will mostly be identical, but essentially what we want to do is, sorry, that's a dot madd. So when somebody clicks on anything with the class madd, which will be any of the add buttons, dot click parentheses semicolon inside the parentheses function parentheses curly bracers inside the curly bracers. We want to create a variable, so var q is equal to $ parentheses inside the parentheses this, meaning this M class, and it will apply specifically to the one that you clicked on. Keep that in mind. Dot prev, which means in the hierarchy of order, the previous field within the same level. So basically, because all of these spans are within this span becomes the parent. So our order class item ID, this is the parent element, and these are all considered children of the parent and siblings among each other. So previous will send you back, so with madd it would go back to this one. With msub, the next class would be this one. So prev, which selects our MQ, our quantity, and because this is a span and not an input, we want the value that's in there, which we get through the HTML. So prev.html, and this will select that value. So whatever this number here is, this value between the span and end span, that is what this will give us. And we're storing that as a variable called q for our quantity. So then we want to check that. So if q is less than 100, and I'll explain in a sec what that does, then curly bracers. And inside the curly bracers, the first thing we want to do is go q++ semicolon. Having this, so a variable that is an integer, it has to be an integer, followed by double plus is a positive increment. If it was double minus, it would be a decrement, or basically it either adds one or takes away one. So it would be the same as writing plus equals 1, essentially, but with one fewer characters. And then this dot prev dot html, and inside the parenthesis after HTML, the letter Q. So essentially what we're doing is we're getting the value of Q, we're adding 1 to it, and then we're sending that back. So it will replace the value with the new value, which is 1 greater. Now, this checks to see if it is below 100. So if it's 99 and we hit the button, it will increase to 100. If it's 100 and we hit the button, then it won't do any of this. So it will just essentially do nothing. So whatever this value is set at is the maximum number that people can order. So this number you can even create as a PHP function, so which we might do later. So you can actually carry an inventory so people can't order more than what you actually have in stock. Something like that. Or if it's a restaurant like this, where it's food items, you don't want them to be able to order more items than you are capable of actually making in a period, because then essentially there's no way you can cook 10,000 fried rice. It's just not going to happen, right? So yeah, you want to set limits. And we're just going to leave it at that for now. We're going to copy and paste this line. And we're going to do m sub. And instead of prev, this is next. And change that here as well. And then instead of plus plus, it's minus minus. And then instead of less than 100, we want that to be greater than 0. So essentially, you can remove items, but you can't go into the negative. So if it's currently at 1, you can click the button and it will subtract 1, bringing it to 0. If it's at 0, it won't go any lower. So we will save that and then go look at our page, just refresh, and see what it does. So the first thing you notice is now when I hover over the plus and minus buttons, we get the pointer and the text goes darker. So we get our dark red and our dark green instead of the bright colors. Again, that was just kind of a fortunate coincidence that our colors we are using were a dark red and dark green that match well up with the bright green and bright red of the success and danger/error message colors. Okay, so now if I click this button, you notice that that number between changes. It doesn't go below 0, and I can click this all the way up to 100. I'm not going to. Just know that it won't go above that. However, if you do hit refresh, it will reset itself back to 0. And that will work with any of these fields. Okay, so that is the first step. So the next step is we need this to actually do something now. That's just kind of the visual element, but we need to actually have it perform a function. So within these, we're actually going to have it do an AJAX request. So we need to create that page that it's going to call on. So the first thing I do is create a new PHP file in our resources, and I'm going to call this CO. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to copy in and paste these lines, my error display and our require core. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm just going to our core file for that. Any of the pages where they are independent of the main page will have that. And just paste that after the PHP there. Now, if I haven't gone through this before, I'm sure I have, but I'll just reiterate. Basically, the double slashes at the beginning just comment out the line so it does nothing. If you want to be able to use this, just delete those two lines and it will function. And it's ini underscore set in parentheses, single quotes, display underscore errors, comma 1, and error underscore reporting in parentheses, -1, with a semicolon. Now, what these two things do together is it will give us PHP errors on the page. So it will actually print the errors onto the page. So if you're having issues, that's a way you can easily check them. However, you don't want to keep those on if it's a live production site. And even if it's not, These error messages can actually cause errors, especially when you're talking about the way things are displayed on the page, because they can shift everything because they do take up space. So it's a good idea to only turn them on if you're having issues and get stuck and you can't figure out what's wrong. Turning that on can give you a big indicator of what the issue is and how to fix it. Alright, so moving on. The first thing we want to do is pull in our variables, which we haven't quite set yet, but essentially we want the item ID, the quantity of the item, and any special options for it. With ours specifically, we have these dinners for two, where you can select either an egg roll or a wonton soup. Sorry. So being able to choose these, that needs to be incorporated so that if I add that, it knows that I need to add those. So we can store that in an options field. So first I'm going to request my item. It's equal to filter input, parentheses, semicolon, input post. Whenever I do the AJAX requests, I always typically use single or double character variables just to keep it simple. And filter validate int. So because our IDs are just serial numbers, so they are integers, we can use the filter validate int and it doesn't need to be anything special. Quantity will be the same. Q. And lastly, our options. And because our options are going to be sent as a JSON array, we need to do that as a callback. O double quotes, sorry, square brackets, inside the square brackets, double quotes, options equal to greater than, double quotes, data secure. Okay, so then what we need to do is we need to check that options to see if it exists, and if it does, then we need to convert it into an array. So if options is equal to JSON underscore decode options. And actually within this, I'm going to need to create another one, because when we send it through our data secure, it's going to actually break the JSON. So we need to repair that with HTML underscore entity underscore decode. So that will convert the appropriate characters back so that it is a proper JSON format, so that when we JSON decode it, it can convert it properly to an array, otherwise it will just break it. All right. So then we create our order item, which is equal to array and inside the parentheses, simply our item, quantity, and options. So we're creating an indexed array where where 0 is our item, 1 is our quantity, and 2 are the options. So next we need to check to see if the order already exists. So long term, what we're going to be doing is creating orders within our database, but we don't want to send order data to the server every time the person makes a change. Remember, this code.php will be called every single time somebody adds or removes an item or just changes the quantity. So we don't want to be calling the server every time it's doing that. So what we want to do is we want to handle this as minimally as we can, not accessing that MySQL database. So we're going to store this information in a cookie. So every time the user makes a change to their current order, it stores it in a cookie on the client's computer, and then when they're actually ready to submit the order, that's when the information gets sent to our database server. So we need to check that cookie to see if it exists and to see if there's any items in it. If it doesn't exist, we have to create a new one. If it does exist, then we want to modify that one. So order is equal to filter input and input underscore cookie, comma order in single quotes, comma filter callback, square brackets, options, set to data secure. Okay. So now we need to check that. So if order and order is not equal to null, and I'll explain that in a second, and null is in single quotes, then order is equal to JSON underscore decode HTML underscore entity underscore decode and options. Sorry, order. And then between the end of parentheses there, we want to go comma true. And what this will do is ensure that it converts it into an array. I'm just going to add that to that one too. All right. So what we're doing here is we're checking to see if the order exists and the order is not equal to null. Now, the reason why this is important is because the way that cookies are handled, because this is coming from a cookie, if the cookie data is null, it saves it as null, but null is not actually a null variable. It is a null string. So it's actually the word null as a string, which is what this is. If it were actually null, we wouldn't put those single quotes. Having the single quotes means that it is a string called null instead of actually being null. Which, if it were actually null, then we wouldn't need this part at all. We just having this, because if it was null, then this would fail and go through. But if you just have this, and this is null, it stores it as a null string, which means that there's a string that's called null, which exists, so therefore this passes and it goes through even though this is empty. So in order to catch that, we need this part. Okay. And that will happen. So the only, because you're thinking, well, why would it exist and be called null? If you had an order, so you created an order, but then you removed all the items from it, it would then be called null. So it would save the order as null. Yes. Very fun. Okay. So the next line within this curly bracer, so hit enter to bring that. So this is the curly bracer from if our order exists. So tab in, $OI is equal to -1, semicolon. And I'll explain why this isn't 0 in a second. And for each order as O equal to greater than OI. Sorry, just I. $order as O equal to greater than $I. So order as O equal to greater than $I. So remember this equal to greater than essentially works as an arrow and is kind of an array format. So what this means is that we've done for each statements before, so we know what it does is it loops through our order array and does each item as O. However, with this one, what O is equal to is also stored as a variable called I that we can access now. And that is somewhat important for what we're going to do with it. So in here, we want to go if, parentheses, $I, square brackets, 0 inside the square brackets, is equal to item. Curly bracers, then OI is equal to O. Cool. So what this means, this order as OI, basically if we just had this O part, so excluding the highlighted part there, order as O, our order would be, our O would be our order items, right? So if we look at it as an array, we have order, and then we have our order item, plural because there's going to be multiple of them, and then within that we would have our item, which is equal to a value, right? So order as O means we're going to cycle through here, so O becomes our order item, and its value is equal to the item, or the this array, right? So what we want is, by doing this O is equal to I, what we're doing is making I our order item, and O then becomes the key. So I is equal to whatever that is equal to, so this, and O is this key. So remember, because this is within an array itself, this has an index, and we need to know what this index is. So is this our first item in the list? Is this our second one, our third one? We need to know what that item number is. So we need that part of it, right? So we need this whole thing because we need to know what the key for this value is. That's kind of the easiest way I can think of to explain that. So essentially what we're doing is the I becomes our order item. So then 0 is the first field, which is the item, right? So this should be the item. So we check to see if it's equal to what our item is. So we go through each list in the order and see if any of them are the same item as what we're calling, so that we can change the quantity or the options without actually creating multiple items for the same item. Then we have OI, which is this number here, is equal to O. So we're assigning this value to whatever the key is for that. So we know which order item number it is, not which specific item number it is, if that makes sense. And the reason why we have to have the default as -1 is we need to know if this exists, and this, the first one, would be 0. So if we make this 0, that would always be the first field, regardless of what that is. So we need to make it a number that's not being used, and because we start with 0, this needs to start at -1. So we know if our OI is still -1, that means that it was not found in the list. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And if not, trust me, it took me a long time to get this to work, and this works. So if our OI is less than 0, so essentially if it's -1, then we array underscore push order, comma, order item. So what the array push function does is it has two variables, or I guess two or more variables. The first variable is an array. The second is a value that you want to add to the end of that array. So if order is our order array, and we searched the entire order and our item was not found, then we need to add this item to our order. So what we're doing is we're pushing it to the end of the order, which this line will then add it to the end. So if we have 3 items in our order, 0, 1, and 2, this item that we just called is not in that list. It would then be added as number 3, essentially. Else, so if it was found in this list, then if, in the parentheses, quantity is less than 1, so we don't have any. So it could be that the item was in our list. However, we set the quantity, we change the quantity, and now that quantity is 0. So essentially, we added the item, but now we want to remove that item. So we changed the quantity from 1 or 2 or whatever it was set to, and we changed it to 0. Then what do we do? $order, square brackets, OI, because now we have this OI variable, which tells us which order item it is that has the item that we're looking for. So order, square brackets, OI, is equal to single quotes. So essentially what we're doing is if the quantity is less than 1, just change that whole array to an empty string, to empty, which essentially removes it, but doesn't quite remove it, and we'll go over that in a sec. So then after that, undo. Between these end curly bracers, hit enter and tab that in, else, curly bracers. So essentially, within this else, so if the OI is greater than -1, so it exists, but the quantity is also greater than 1, then we need to actually modify it. So then what we do is we go order OI 1. So the OI and 0 would be the item number. So that's not going to change. What's going to change is possibly the quantity and the options. We could check each one of these individually, but there's nothing that would change if it wasn't manually changed, because each time it's changed, it will call this function. So it's safe to just change both of them at the same time, even if one doesn't actually do anything. So 1 is equal to our quantity, and order OI 2 is equal to options. Okay, so then on the same line as this, if you want, you can break it down, but I don't like leaving big spaces like that, so I'm just going to put it after here. Order is equal to array underscore filter array underscore filter. And in the parentheses, order. Okay. So what this does is it filters the array order and stores that back in order. Now, what this function does is it can be used to filter any array and change things within it using a custom built function. But if it lacks any functions, so the first one is the array it's affecting, and the second field would be a function, but because we're lacking one, all it does is reorganize the array. So what it will do is, if, for example, we had one of the fields that had less than 0 and we made it blank, instead of having items 0 that has something, 1 that is now blank, 2 that has something, it would basically remove 2 and then change 3 to 2. So it removes any blank ones and then renumbers them in order from first to last type thing. So 1 stays 1, 3 would become 2 in that case, and so on. So that's what array filter does, just cleans up our array if we're making messy changes like that. Okay, now after this one, we're doing an else and curly bracers, and that is order is equal to array order item. So what this last one, so if the order exists and the order is not null, then do all this. But if order doesn't exist, or it is null, so our order is blank, we don't have an order, then what we want to do is we want to just create an array called order and add our order item to it as the first item. So if it doesn't exist, create it. Okay, so now that our order is created, we need to encode it as a JSON object. So order is equal to JSON underscore encode. If I can actually spell that. Order is equal to JSON underscore encode parentheses, and in here order comma true. The true part, whenever we're dealing with the JSON encoding and decoding, that second variable comma true, if you don't have that at all, it defaults to false, and the JSON will use JSON or JavaScript object notation, so it will create JavaScript objects. Using the comma true forces it to use arrays instead of objects. With JavaScript, there's not much difference between an array and an object. However, PHP only deals with arrays, it doesn't deal with objects. So I like to be consistent when I'm passing code back and forth and just stick with the arrays, which is why I always add that comma true. Then we need to create our cookie. So the name of the cookie is order in single quotes. Then the value of it is our order array, which has now been JSON encoded, which basically converts it from an array to a string that can be passed. Then our expiration is time plus, now this is a value in seconds, so 3600 would be 1 hour. I'm going to use 7200, which is 2 hours. Just because I feel like that is the appropriate amount of time to give somebody to create an order. Now, remember that that timer, whatever this is updated every time they make a change. So it's not 2 hours from when they first start creating the order, it's 2 hours from the last time they changed anything. So basically, between the last item that they added to their order and when they actually hit send, that is 2 hours. And I think that is a fair enough amount of time. If they get disconnected or they need to go and run and find a credit card so that they can give you money, which is always nice, we need to give them some time, but not too much time. Calling the wife to make sure that they didn't forget anything, because they're in big trouble if they did. Those kind of things. All right. Comma. single quotes with a forward slash, comma, single quotes empty, comma, 1, comma, 0. And I mentioned before what all those things mean, and I don't like having to repeat that. So I'm not going to. And lastly, we need to echo this out because this is JavaScript. So we're just going to echo out the actual order and hit exit. Sorry, we're just going to echo out added, the string added, and hit exit. Oh, sorry, forgot a semicolon. That's why that little red thing was there and why it was underlined. Echo in single quotes added, semicolon, exit, semicolon. Okay. Now, one other thing you could do is have it checked to see if there is anything being added. So if the only thing you're doing is removing the last item, then you could set the cookie with a negative time so that it removes it completely, and that would kind of remove the need for having this null this null check. However, it's a lot simpler just to have this part in than to have even just writing another cookie, let alone all the other code you would need to add to check for that. So if they remove everything, they'll just have an empty cookie sitting on their computer for 2 hours until it goes away. And I'm fine with that. All right, so now let's go back to our menu page and add the rest of our code. So essentially what we want to do is after we set the quantity back, we want to break that down. There we go. And we need to create a new variable called I, because we need to get our item. So $ parentheses this dot parent, because remember the item ID. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to extract this number. Now it would be a lot easier if I didn't have the item hyphen, admittedly. However, I like to keep things clean. Just having a number as an ID, if you have numbers as ID anywhere else, that can cause issues. So I always like to have some kind of other part other than just some random number as an ID to prevent that kind of crossover. Because I could do the same thing with this one, right? If I remove that MQ, but then issues. So it's easier to cut that out than to just leave that as an ID. But anyway, this is the parent item to either of these buttons. And what we want to get from that is we need to extract that ID. So back up, down to our code. Here we go. Okay, so this dot parent dot attr, which is attribute, which allows you to effectively get any attribute and change any attribute on any tag. It's a very powerful little piece of code. And in there, double quotes and ID. So we're getting the attribute ID, and it will actually provide us with the value of that and store it in our variable. So semicolon after attribute. So then what we do is we take that I and we make it equal to I dot substring substr parentheses semicolon, and inside the parentheses the number 5. So what does this do? Basically it says take the value of I, which is our ID, and create a substring. So basically find the fifth character and cut off anything before it, feed me everything after it. So we start on character 5. Remember that the first character is 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 would be the rest, which is our ID. So that returns just the actual ID number, removing the item hyphen, and then stores that in our I variable. So then I becomes just the ID number. Okay, new line. So now we're going to do a post call. So $.post, parentheses, semicolon, inside that post, double quotes, and https : our website /resources /co.php, comma, curly bracers, comma, function, parentheses, curly bracers. Inside the parentheses, data, and inside the first set of curly bracers, we're going to go I : I. So we're creating a PHP input or PHP post input variable called I, and giving it a value of the JavaScript variable I, which is our ID number, comma, Q : Q, so our quantity, which is here, we pulled up earlier, and then lastly we're going with O : and because we haven't gotten there yet, we're just going to leave that blank, so a pair of double quotes with nothing in between them. Okay, then it will run those and pop out hopefully the data, which will be equal to added. So we will check for that. So if parentheses data is equal to double quotes added, then, and we're just going to send that for now to our log, or sorry, to our console log. So console.log, parenthesis, semicolon, and then inside the parenthesis, data. Or you can put any kind of message, so double quotes and success, for example. So save that, and then essentially we're going to copy those two lines exactly as they are with no changes to them and paste them into this one. And save that, because they are the exact same for both. Okay, so that's saved, and go in to our menu page, refresh, and right click inspect, and click on the console tab, and success. Success, success, success. Every change I make was successful. We can further go into that by going into our application, and under storage cookies, make sure we have our site selected. You should have our user cookie, which is our login information, and our order cookie, which you can see here is a long string with a lot of percentage signs. that's part of that encoding. However, this isn't actually encrypted in any way, and we don't really want it to be, because this is something that changes every time you're making something here. So every time this changes, it's going to affect this, and if we had that encoded, it'd be very easy for hackers to figure this out and basically backward engineer our encryption algorithm and be able to essentially break into the site by cracking our passwords, and we don't want that. So something like that we don't want to bother encrypting, because it's very easy for them to figure out what it is. So 1, right? Like we added 1 of whatever this is, so they can see those changes. So don't bother encrypting information that's not sensitive. That could be a security risk if you do. All right, so that is that. And you see that even though I've completely removed everything, it still has a value, which is essentially just null. I think this equates to a pair of quotation marks, double quotes maybe. I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, so that works. So the next part that we need to do for this is incorporate our options and then actually allow people to create the order. And we also want to update, as we add items, our order and order page. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create a little icon at the top of our order button here that will show a number in it, which is the number of items. Now, this kind of thing you'll see on a lot of sites, and it's just one of those very simple things to do. It just counts the number of items that are in our shopping cart, quote unquote, so that people know that there are items there, and if they added that quick indication that something actually was added, so that they don't have to go in and check each time to make sure that it was added properly. They get that visual indication. So what we want to do is every time one of these buttons is clicked, it adds a number there. So the first thing we need to do is actually go in and create that. So going into our index.php page and finding our span with our order on it. So that is this little button here. And what we want to do is we want to add something within the span just on the end of this. So we're going to create a subtag, sup, and I'm not sure if I've ever gone over what sup or sub are. Basically, this is the HTML shortcode for superscript, or sub sub would be subscript. So if you think of it in terms of a Word document, superscript is writing that is slightly higher, and subscript is something that is slightly lower. So for example, in math, if you were to write an exponent, that would be superscript. So a small number that would be not middle aligned vertically, but higher up. So it's typically smaller and higher, like a math exponent. So like meters squared, that 2 that represents squared is superscript. So we want this to be superscript. And we're going to give it a class, which is equal to badge. Now, the badge class typically applied to a span, but we're applying it to a superscript so that we get that height that we want. The badge is basically a bootstrap predefined class that creates a small circle or oval with the intention of putting numbers in it, which is exactly what we're using it for. And after that class, we're going to give it an ID, and that ID is going to be equal to OC, or just simply order count. And we don't need to put anything in it, just leave it like that. However, in front of that, so between our order and our superscript here, we're going to add a space. So ampersands NBSP. We want it to be a non-breaking space because we don't want it to ever have to drop below this. We want it to be beside this at all times, but we don't want it to be immediately beside the letter. We want to give it a little bit of a space. So if you want to test that, just put any number in between the subtags and save that. Go to our page and hit refresh, and you will see it right there. So if I didn't have that space, refresh, notice it's like clipping into that R. It's just way too close. If you want to give it more space, you can, but I think one is good enough. We just want to give it a little bit of space so it's not crowding, but we want it close enough that people are very clear that it belongs to this button. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is have it apply some classes, because I'm not exactly thrilled with the coloring of it. So go into our CSS page, and we're going to write $OC because we're talking about the ID, curly bracers. Inside the curly bracers, we're going to change the color to our gold, which is C90, our background color, which is the color of the tag. So the gold, which is the background color, becomes our text color, and the background color becomes the color of the circle, is going to be our red. And then I'm going to create another one for the hover effect. And we're just going to change the background color to our green. So now when I refresh that, so now the only thing is, if you hover over the order and not on the badge, then the color won't actually change. So it doesn't make it appear as much that they are connected as one. So what we can do is use a little bit of JavaScript to kind of fudge that in. So if that's the route we want to go back to our NetBeans. In our CSS, we can remove this hover part because we won't be needing that, because we're going to do this part with JavaScript. We go to our core PHP file, and we go down to the bottom of our JavaScripts and create a new line. And in here, $JS is dot equal to dollar parenthesis. Now in here we need to call the parent function, so whatever that button is that gives us this order, we need that button. So we go back to our index.php page, and as you can see, it is this item here. So the parents for this are this span class, which doesn't have a class or an ID, this anchor tag, which is the link, which makes it a clickable button, but also lacks either an ID or a class, and finally this list item. So what we need to do is give one of these an ID. I would recommend either the LI or the anchor. I'm going to put it on the LI. So simply ID is equal to, I'm going to call this OCP, because that's Omni Corporation products, and they own the police. Okay, so we go back here and we go pound OCP dot hover parentheses semicolon, and in the hover we need two functions, so function parentheses curly bracers comma function parentheses curly bracers. Now the hover is one of the only what are those called, events, one of the only jQuery events that has two functions, and that's because hover is a combination of mouse enter and mouse leave. So we could do this in two parts, using this and dot mouse enter, and then a function, and then having another one that's this dot mouse leave and function, or combining them, have that dot mouse enter function dot mouse leave function, but we can combine them into hover, create a little bit less work for us. Okay, so in the enter one, we then call our OC which is our sup, and give it a CSS. And the way that we use the CSS event is double quotes, comma, double quotes. And in the first set of double quotes is the attribute, and in the second is the value. So we want to change the background hyphen color, and we want to change that to our green, and then the same thing background color, we want to change back to our red, and save that. Go here, save that, and go back to our page, refresh that. So now when I hover over any of it, they change together from our red to our green. And the reason we had to do it with JavaScript and the reason we couldn't just do it with CSS is because with this part we're changing the text color, and with this part we're leaving the text color and changing the background color. So we can either change the background color of everything or the foreground color of everything, but we can't change the foreground of one and the background of another through pure CSS. So that's why we did it with JavaScript. But as you can see, it works perfectly fine. Okay. So moving on now, we need to then have this number actually be able to change. So go back to our index.php page, and we're just going to remove that placeholder number that we put in there. Save. We want to go into our menu.php. Okay, so we have our two variables that we created, our JavaScripts, and we have it just giving us the success message. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this so that instead of giving us a success message, it gives us the number that we want to actually put into that field and then put it into that field. So assuming that data, so that the information that we're getting from the server from our code.php script is an integer, that is the total quantity of items, we go if data is greater than 0, so I'm just going to change that in both of these, then and remove this console.log, and in there we want to $, parentheses, double quotes, hashtag OC dot HTML, parentheses, data, semicolon. So this will then give our value and put it in between the tags, so it will basically determine what the number is. So that's good. However, if the number is 0, then we don't want that tag to appear at all. So if I refresh that, we don't want it to appear at all if there's nothing in there. So in order for us to do that, because even if that number is 0, that would still print it to there. So if we go here and we put 0 in there, it still gives us a 0, and we don't want that. And we don't want it taking up extra space either. So going back to our menu, what we want to do is add this dot fade in. And then after our curly bracer, else copy that, paste it in, and I'm going to delete this part. So if the data is 0, then we're not going to change the number that's in there because we don't really care what the number is, and we're going to fade out. So basically it will still show the same number, but it'll just fade the whole thing out. And then if a number is added, it will change the number to the new number, so the number is already there, and then fade it in. So it'll have a kind of fade in, fade out effect. So then I will just copy this. Paste it. Perfect. Just making sure I have the proper number of curly bracers at the end there. Okay, so now we need to go to our code.php page and change this from echoing the word added and giving us an actual variable. So we need to first get that number. So what we want to do is we could try to add it somewhere in the middle here, but where we have our for each loop already, that is only being run if certain conditions are met, and we want to run it regardless of conditions. So what we want is the final product, which is right here. So before we encode it into JSON, while it's still a PHP array, that's when we want to utilize it. So we're going to create a new line here, And in here, we're going to create a new variable called OC, and we're giving it a value of 0. And then for each order as O, and in our curly bracers, OC plus equals int in parentheses $O square brackets 1 in the square brackets, outside the square brackets, semicolon. So what this does is it cycles through our order and gives us each order item as O. So O1 would be the quantity for each one of those. By putting the int in parentheses in front of it, we're forcing that to be an integer as opposed to a number string. And then we're adding that to our OC variable, which starts off as 0. So this will go through each item. So if one item has a quantity of 1, another item has a quantity of 2, it won't just give us 2 for 2 different items, but it'll give us 3 because one of those items has a quantity of 2. So it adds the quantities for each of the items. So we're getting that total. And then what we do is when we go to echo, instead of echoing the add, we echo our OC variable. So the last line should be echo space $OC semicolon space exit semicolon. Save that, go back to our website, refresh, notice that it is now gone, and then if I add anything, that number now changes to correspond with the total. And as we change it up or down, that number changes too. And if we remove it to 0, it fades out. We add 1 again, it fades back in. Now you notice the height of that line does change slightly, and that's because we're using the superscript, so it offsets our margins a little bit, but I'm not overly worried about that. All right. So that is all we actually need for the front page, and then the rest would be in our order. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is go over a couple of the issues that we have right now. So the first issue, if you notice right now I have the create account and login buttons up here. That means that I am not currently logged in. So when I'm not logged in, I shouldn't be able to see the order button. I shouldn't be able to add and subtract. We want to make sure that those options to order online are only available when you're logged in. The second issue is that if you notice right now everything is zeroed out. I don't have anything in my order. If I go to add an item, like say the special fried rice, notice now this went from 1 to 17. That's because all the other items that I had clicked on have since vanished, but they still exist in that order cookie because my order cookie still exists. So if I inspect, go to application, find my cookie, I have my order cookie here, and it still has all of my order. The problem is that's not represented on the page because it's not persisting. What I mean is that if I'm just going to close that, if I refresh my page, note everything is zeroed out again. However, the order still exists in that cookie. So when I go to add something, it's adding that to the cookie and it's popping up there. So what we want to do is make our cookie persist. So the information in our cookie, when we reload this page, the page should be loading the information from the cookie and filling it out accordingly. So that way, if this page refreshes, it still has all of that information. And then, like I said, we want to make sure that when we log in, when we go to make orders, we can only do it if we're logged in. So we're going to address those two things right now, and then we're going to continue to create our order page. So first, go to our index.php page and find the order button line right here. And we're going to do a couple things with this. The first is where if s allow orders, so we're checking to see if orders are allowed, and if they are, then give us that. We want to create a space after that and a double ampersand for and $C. So this checks to see if the client information is available, so if they're logged in. So allow orders has to be enabled and the customer has to be logged in order for them to see this button. The next thing we want to do is for the other part. So what we're going to do here is for our sup badge, we're going to put a PHP variable in there. And this is going to be called Qt. So what we'll do is when we draw the cookie, which we'll do on another page, we'll put the information from that cookie into this variable. What we need to do is check if that exists. So if Qt doesn't exist, then Qt is equal to blank. And that will just prevent us from getting errors associated with that. So this will basically hide if our Qt variable is empty. Otherwise, it will display that number. So that's just the first part of what we'll need for our index.php page. So save that. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is go to our core page, so our, in this case, highway45.php, and we will put it between, I guess, just above our admin switches. And we'll call this get order. So the first thing we want to do is create our Qt variable and set it to 0. Then we're going to get our order variable. Okay. So we create our Qt variable at 0, we call our order, we check to see if our order exists. If so, then decode it. Else order is equal to nothing. And that's just in case the order is equal to null. We just want to remove the null part. And that's why we have that last piece. In here, we're going to add for each. Order as O qt plus equals to O1. And this will get us our qt value. And that's all we need for that, so save that one. And now we go to our menu page. So menu.php. And we want to go down to, and right after this, minc equals red equals blank, and before our if mi items. Add a new line. And this is if orders, order, then for each order as O. So essentially the same thing that we did on the last page. If O0 is equal to mi ID then Q is equal to O 1. And then we scroll down until we find our quantity here. And we're going to change that 0 to our Q variable. And where we had that red, here we go. After this one, we want to create our Q variable is equal to 0. So that way, if it isn't in there, it's defaulted to 0. And that's everything for the menu page. I need to do the same thing at the top of the menu page here. So in this case, it's if the S allow orders, so if the switch allow orders is not set, then hide that. And we want to go or parenthesis, or sorry, exclamation mark, $C. So if C does not exist, or if allow switch, or allow orders switch is set to no, then hide that stuff. And there we go. So we're logged out. We don't get the order information, so we can see the menu, we can see the prices, but we can't order unless we're logged in. If we try to go to the order page manually, well, we haven't actually adjusted anything there, so never mind that. Okay, so I'm going to log in. And now that I'm logged in, I have my order page back. I can go to our menu. So there we go. That all works. Okay. Now, if that isn't working for you and you were following extremely closely, I did have a little typo that I had to go back and fix, and that was in the Highway 45. This filter callback, I had a dot instead of a comma there. Gave me a little bit of grief, but changed that, fixed it all. And now that is complete, and we can go on to our order.php page. So in here we have our basic little disclaimer page that we copy and pasted. So the first thing we can do is delete our H4 line, and in there, in its place, we're going to just put the PHP variable my order. And you can do camel caps, I just left it all lowercase. And the rest is all going to be above this. So we're going to start by going to our menu page, and we're going to copy all of this. So copy that and go to our order page and paste. And then just give a little bit of a gap for that. So we have, again, allow orders and checking to see if we're logged in. And if not, then delete that. And we're going to send them back to the home page. So header, double quotes, location with a capital L, colon, https, colon, double space, highway45.ca /. Okay, so if orders are not allowed or they are not logged in, just send them directly to the home page, because they shouldn't be able to directly access this, so they're trying to do something they shouldn't be doing, and we don't need to do anything especially kind for them, like remembering their language. Just kick them back to the main page. Then we need our make constant function that we had created for our menu page, because we are going to be dealing with menu items here. And we need to get our menu items from the database. So we need this M variable, our menu items. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is double check to see if our order variable is there again. So if, but we're going to be doing the opposite here. So if no order exists, or, so double bar, order is equal to null, then my order y key is equal to I'm going to create an H3 . You have not added any items to your order. And keep in mind that if you are doing multiple languages, you are going to need to replace this text with a PHP constant and then add that to your language files. At the end of that, go else, curly bracer, and another curly bracer. So now the rest of our code will all be inside this. So I'm just going to cinch that up to that. Okay. So the next thing we need to do is start creating our order page. So my order is equal to div id equals my order. My order dot equals to div class is equal to row and id is equal to order header. And then basically I'm just going to go through and create a header using spans. Now for each of these, I'm using so I'm creating a div with a class of row, and then within that div, I will have spans with classes of call hyphen XS for extra small hyphen, and then the numbers that will add up to 12. And the reason why I'm using the extra small is because whether it's the largest or the smallest, I don't want it to be any different. So the way that I have it laid out is the way that it will be laid out regardless of size. I never want them to drop down to have different items on new rows by themselves. And then in here, this one is just going to have a hashtag. And then I'm going to copy that line to save myself some typing. And this one is going to be 6, so it's going to take up half the space. That one's going to have item name. Next one is, I'm not changing the number here, I'm putting a space and the letter I. Now if you remember, we created a class in CSS for I, which just makes it italic. So this text will be italic, and this will be quantity. My next column is going to be double width, and this is going to be price, and in parenthesis I'm putting a $sign. Although I guess thinking about it, you don't actually need to have that. But actually, yeah, I'm just going to get rid of that altogether. And after price, this one is also going to be 2, and this is going to say total. Then my order dot equal to we're going to close off the div, then we're going to create an HR. Now an HR tag, HR stands for horizontal rule. It's basically a horizontal line that's used as a break between text. So it's kind of like a fancy underline, but used for breaks. People really debate about when and where they should ever be used. And it used to be that you would style it directly within the tag using attributes, but now with HTML5, CSS has taken over all the styling for the HR, so we just leave it as HR. And then after this, because that one is short, I'm going to just write price as my price variable is equal to 0. And this will come into play in a little bit. Okay, so the next, for each, order as OI. And my order is dot equal to div class is equal to row, and ID is equal to order hyphen item hyphen, then we're going to break out of the PHP, and in parenthesis we're going to write $O plus 1. And I will explain that in a bit. I'm going to, no, I won't copy that. I'll create a new one. So new line after that, my order again, dot equal to, and this time it's a span. Class is equal to call hyphen XS hyphen 1 space, MYO, and then in between the span, parentheses again, $O plus 1. I'm going to copy that line and paste it, and change the XS1 to 6. So if you notice, we're going to be copying the numbers from the header, essentially. So effectively what we're doing is using the bootstrap rows and columns to create a table. So for this one, delete the stuff between the dots and make constant parentheses. And in there, $M, square brackets, inside the square brackets, $I, square brackets, and inside the square brackets, 0. So essentially what we're doing is we're combining this M with our I that we got from here. So the item name, or the item ID, is what that I0 gives us, and we're using that in the M to get the ID, and then after this, name. So you want to make sure that this last set of square brackets goes after all the other end brackets that came before it, and then that is all wrapped in the make constant. So this fetches the name of the item, and then the make constant is our tool to convert that into a constant, which will then be automatically translated. Okay. And the reason why this is O plus 1, so O gets us our key for the order. So each item has a key assigned to it. So it starts basically 0, 1, 2, 3 for each item in our order. But because we don't want the number to start with 0, we want it to start with 1, we add 1 to each of them. So instead of it being 0, 1, 2, 3, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so the next line. And this is the quantity, which is that, and it is I with 1 in square brackets. And these two are both 2. And the difference is the second one and sorry, I forgot that here. For this total, I'm going to add a space and B to the class so that the total is bold. And likewise, this MYO space B to make that line bold. And our quantity here will have a space and I to make it italic. Okay, so now for these ones we need the price. So I'm going to delete that, I'm going to delete this one, and it'll error because it wants some kind of value between these dots. $M, square brackets, inside those square brackets, $I, square brackets, inside those square brackets, 0. So we're getting our item. And then here, outside of those square brackets in there, price. So this is the exact same as our name, except we aren't using the make constant, and instead of name, it's price. Now in front of that, so between the end of the span tag and before that single quote, we're going to add a $sign. Now the reason we're doing that is because this is a price, and this value is stored as a number with 2 decimal places. So it's basically looking like a price already. The only thing it's missing is the $sign in front of it. So we just add that there. So for our total, we're going to do the same thing, add a $sign in front of it. However, for this, we're going to do a little bit of math. So what we need to do is going to put parentheses and a asterisk and another set of parentheses, and then we're going to put all of that in a set of parentheses. So in the first one, we're going to put our price. So we're just going to copy that and paste that into that first set of parentheses. In the second set of parentheses, we are going to copy and paste our quantity. So our total is our price times our quantity. Now the only issue with this is that this will actually reformat our number. Here it had 2 decimal places. Here it will just reduce it to the smallest value. So for example, if you have 2 items that end in .95, and like I said, the quantity is 2, then the total price, the change at the end would be 90 cents, and that would show as 0.9 instead of 0.90. So to ensure that we have 2 characters after the decimal place, we need to format this. So in order to do that, we put all of this into another set of quotes, another set of parentheses, and in front of that we go number underscore format. Then just before the last end parentheses, go comma 2, which means we want it to be to 2 decimal places. Then my order dot equals to, and close the div off. Then we want to set our price. So price is plus equals to and everything within our number format, so our unformatted value there, paste that in. So what this will do is it will take our price, which started at 0, and we'll add the price of each one, which already takes into account the price and the quantity, so it's the total really. And this price will then become our rolling total. It is unformatted because we don't need to format it each time. We'll just format it once at the end. So going down to the next line, which is after our for each, so once it's gone through the entire loop, we then want to set two things. First, we need to set our taxes. So if you have taxes and you know what they are, if they're consistent, we can just add them as 1. If they're not consistent for each item, you may want to add a tax field in the actual database and then draw from that. It's quite a bit more work, and because I don't have to do it, I'm not going to. So I'm going to skip over showing you guys that. So I apologize for people who need to do things like break apart PST from GST, or if your country is not Canada and you have other forms of taxes that are just excruciating to have to deal with, that's going to be on you. So the only tax we have to deal with here is GST, which is a flat 5% on everything, which makes the math relatively easy. So what we do is we do our number format. Oh, sorry, I need an equal sign here. So tax is set to number format, comma 2, and a set of parentheses inside that. Then inside of this parentheses, we're going price times 0.05. So our total price times 0.05, or basically 5%, and then formatted to 2 decimal places. Then we're going to create a total variable, which is equal to number format and this one. Now I could do price plus tax, but I prefer doing it a cleaner way, which is just price times 1.05. Because the way that tax is rounded when you show it and the actual amount don't always add up to the same thing. So I just prefer to do it this way. It's cleaner. Okay. Next line. So this is still within this because everything that we're typing is before this one, but it's after this on a new line. My order dot equal to and the first thing I'm going to put in is an HR again. And then a div and this div is going to have a class of row and it's going to have a span with a class call XS8 and I'm not going to have anything in that span. It's going to be empty. sorry, that's going to be 10, not 8. Span class, span, call XS 2 space MYO space I. And I'm also going to give this one an ID, which is equal to price. Then in here, I'm going to put a $, pair of single quotes, inside the single quotes, dots, inside there, price. New line, my order, my order dot equals div class equals row div inside the div span class equals span call hyphen xs hyphen 8 span class equals call XS 2 space MYO space I. And in this one, between the spans G dot S dot T dot. Another span. Class is equal to call dash XL hyphen 2 space MYO space I, and in there, oh sorry, after this class we're going to have an ID is equal to tax, and in here tax, and again with the $sign in front. This one I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to copy my tax one and paste that. And the GST I am changing to total. I just noticed that I missed the Y there, so that's a good catch. And with the I, I'm also going to add B and red. Change the ID to total, and from tax to total. And then for the next line, going to be a little bit different. My order is dot equal to, and we're going to close off our div. Then we're going to close off an extra div, and then we're going to create a div. So this extra one that we close off, it's really important to know what that is. And if you look here where my order is, essentially we're closing off a div, so we're copying this or overwriting this one, which is the closing line for our panel body. So by closing that here and then creating a new one, this becomes the close for our new one, which is going to be panel footer. So we have the heading, the body, and then we're going to create a footer. So div class is equal to panel hyphen footer. Then we're going to create another div, and this one is going to have a class btn hyphen group space btn hyphen group hyphen lg and btn hyphen group hyphen justified. Okay. Now we're going to skip a line and do my order dot equals to, and we're going to close off our div that we just created, so the button group div, and we're going to create a break. Okay, and then above that, my order dot equals to single quotes, and we're going to create a div and give that div a class equal to btn hyphen group. Then in there we're going to create a button and give our button a class which is equal to btn space btn hyphen danger space my obtn and disabled. Then we're going to give it a type is equal to button and an ID which is equal to cancel hyphen order. And then between the button tags, we're going to just put cancel space order. Then we're going to copy that and paste it twice. Go up to the second one and edit it. Change the danger to warning. Go down, change the last one, danger, to success. And go up, change the ID of the middle one from cancel order to pay hyphen later, and change the ID of the last one to pay-now. Change the wording from cancel order of the middle one to submit order colon space pay later and submit order colon space pay now. And we're going to save that, refresh, go to our order page, and that is what we have so far. Now what we're going to do is go in and create our classes. That will affect a lot. Okay, so go to our CSS page, and the first thing we want to do is create the MyO class. And there we're just going to adjust the size. So font hyphen size colon, and we want this to scale with it as we change it, so we want it in a viewable width, which is why we created the class. And I'm going with 2.4 VW. Now, depending on the columns that you have, you may want to adjust that. But I'll show you what it looks like on ours. The next one is pound order hyphen heading. Sorry, header. And for this one, we're going with font weight of bold and font size of 1.4 VW. So it needs to be smaller, and the main reason for this, so this is the header line, whereas this is all the information. So this is the header line, and then this is the information between. And the main thing here is that we want the header information to be smaller because the quantity needs to be smaller, because as this gets bigger or smaller, that quantity will just take up too much room. So it can't be the same size as the rest of this, which we can scale up quite a bit. And then the last one is MyO BTN. And this one we're going with a font size of 1.8 VW and a line height of 2 EM. And the reason why I'm increasing the line height here, so default would be 1. Sorry, I forgot my semicolon there. Semicolon. It is clearly bedtime. Okay, so font size 1.8 VW, line height 2 EM, which 1 EM is basically your default. So the reason why I'm increasing that is because I want the, while I don't have extra horizontal space that I can give the buttons because they're justified already, so they're taking up as much space as possible, I can increase the vertical height of the button to increase the size of the buttons. So that's what I'm doing there. And then I'm going to give it a font weight of bolder. And save that. Go back to my order page and refresh. So, significant difference there. And remember what I said about the prices. I neglected to change that on these. So you see this one does not have the 2 there. So going back to our order. So where I have the price here, I need to format that number. Like that. The total and the tax I formatted here, but I didn't do the same for the price. That. And one thing I forgot in our CSS, scrolling up, is underneath the text area, I added this. So HR, our horizontal rule, and then width of 100%, height of 2 pixels, background color of #333, which is our gray color that we're using. So to adjust the color of the horizontal rule, you need to change the background color. And then border none, if you have a border for it, that will actually create a kind of shadow effect behind it, which is not necessarily ideal. We have our items. There we go. Okay, so what we had to do to get it so that it wasn't so that it was reordering the numbers. So we just have our sequential numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but without actually changing the order of the items to match the order that they are on the menu, because that's what it was doing before using the sort function. What we did was we removed that and we added this array values to our order. So after we filter it, we then do array values, and it basically resorts it based on the current values. That function does what we wanted it to. So the war wonton soup, which I added last, is the last item on the list, even though numerically it would be placed second. Alright, so now the next step is basically to get these buttons to work. I have them disabled for now because we're going to do this in the next video. The cancel order button will simply delete our cookie and clear all this out. And the submit order pay later is basically what you'll use if you're going to pay in store, or if it's delivered, have them pay when you receive it. And the submit order pay now will allow you to actually prepay for your order online, so that we can do online payments as well. So we'll walk through doing that, and we'll do most of that in the next video. So yes, we now have our working order page. We just can't actually submit the orders. All right, see you guys in the next video.